To Joe Stunner Boxing. I hope you're doing well. One of my subscribers, what's his name now? Boxing Monkey, I think his name is a good name. He said to me, he left a comment in one of the in the comment section of one of the videos, previous videos, and he said, "Why don't you do a video on Carl Thompson, the cat from Manchester, who was the former WBO cruiserweight champ, also held the British and the EBU title. I think he held the EBU title twice. And Thompson is, if you know anything about boxing, British boxing, Thompson was one of the most exciting British fighters of the last 30, 35, 40 years. I mean, he's wildly exciting, come from behind, real Arturo Gatti stuff. You know, it's fantastic to watch, wildly entertaining. And his career actually spanned from 1988, when he made his debut, up to 2005. Now, Thompson turned pro with absolutely no fanfare whatsoever. He was actually a part of Phil Martin's Champs Camp. And if you know anything about Phil Martin, he was a guy who died a premature death of cancer, which is very sad. But during his lifetime, he created the Champs Camp in Manchester. No-nonsense, spit and sawdust type of environment. Took a lot of young lads who might have gone down the wrong path. Gave them the discipline and the structure that boxing gives. And some of them went on to have very, very successful careers. But at the start of their careers, none of them were fancied as potential champions. They really had to earn everything. And Carl Thompson was one of those guys. And like I say, Carl turned pro in 1988. He won his first 8 or 9 fights, I think it was. And this was up until he fought quite frequently. Wasn't always expected to win. Sometimes he was in, most of the time in those early, or that first year, he was in with journeyman. But then in 1989, he bumped into Crawford Ashley for the Central Area light heavyweight title, which was vacant. And he got stopped in 6 rounds. And Crawford Ashley was a very, very good fighter. Another one who's sort of forgotten, really. He was EBU champ, and I think he boiled himself down to super middleweight. He came in very, very light for a fight with I can't remember which belt. It might have been the WBA super middleweight belt. With Michael Nunn held it. And Michael Nunn was pretty much in his prime. He was not far off it. And Crawford got stopped with body punches. But at European level, Crawford actually was a very, very good fighter. And he handed Carl Thompson the first defeat of his career, which was a 6th round TKO. The following fight, I think Crawford went over to either Germany or Belgium. I think it was Belgium. And he fought Franco Wanyama, who I think was Ugandan and had settled in Belgium, if memory serves. And he lost a 6th rounder to Wanyama. Wanyama would go on to have a half decent career. He was not a bad European level fighter, and I think he held the Commonwealth cruiserweight belt at one point. Wanyama. At the time, he was just starting out his career, and he took a 6 round points decision over Carl Thompson. Carl was still learning, though. He was picking up. He picked up back-to-back defeats. But he was still learning. And in fact, his following fight, he fought Terry Dixon, who was undefeated, and won a 8-round points decision. He then went abroad again and fought Yowie Davis, who was, again, another really good fighter. A guy from Uganda, settled in Italy, and he knocked Carl out in 2 rounds. And yeah, Yowie Davis, he wasn't a bad fighter at all. He was another guy who would go on to hold the EBU, the European title. So 3 defeats in 4 fights for Carl. We're up to 1991 now. Was not. People were beginning to think, well, maybe Carl's found his level, domestic level. But the following fight, they put Carl in with the undefeated Nicky Piper, who was 10 wins, no defeats, 1 draw. And Carl was. This was at the York Hall over in Bethnal Green. Carl was expected to lose. In fact, he knocked out one of the promoters' favourites, Frank Warren fighter at the time, Nicky Piper, knocked him out in 3 rounds. And that really got people's attention. And in fact, it got Carl shot at the British cruiserweight title, which was vacant. These were the days. This was 1992. Now these were the days before the cruiserweight division was really established, and you had people like Derek Angle, Terry Dunstan, a couple of others that slipped my mind. Stuart Lithgow was one of the first British champs. But it was gradually becoming a division where it was becoming established, and Carl picked up against Steve Lewsome. He picked up the vacant cruiserweight title with an 8th round KO, and then he fought a couple of I think he won the WBC International Cruiser title, which got him a ranking, and that was against Arthur Weathers, Arthur Stormy Weathers, predictable nickname, but stopped him in 2 rounds. Weathers would actually come back to Britain and fight David Hay at one point. I think Weathers held a belt very briefly. Can't remember which one it was. But anyway, Carl carried on a winning run, and in fact, he went over to Italy and fought a guy called Massimiliano Duran over in Italy. This was for the EBU cruiserweight title. Now, if you know anything about Italy back in the 80s and 90s, you'll know that the old had to knock them out to get a draw was pretty much accurate. And in fact, Carl did knock him out. He knocked out Massimiliano Duran in 8 rounds, and he became the EBU champ, which was a tremendous achievement. So he's now British champ and EBU champ. He went back over to the continent, to France, for Akim Taifa. By the way, Massimiliano Duran at one point was a WBC cruiserweight champ. He had it was weird because he had 2 fights that were both, I think, back-to-back disqualifications, and one was against Carlos de Leon, where he won the WBC title, and then against Anaclet Wamba, he had another disqualification over 12, and then he fought Wamba again and got stopped in 11. But he briefly, with those 2 disqualifications, he was the WBC champ. So again, this is another guy Carl's taking on in his own backyard, and he beat him. Carl was picking up. He was learning all the time. He was not ducking anyone. He was fighting everyone. Then he goes over to France, fights Akim Taifa, stops him in 6th round. And again, Taifa was another decent fighter. He wasn't bad at all. Good European level fighter who, again, he held the EBU title. So as far as European level is concerned, Carl's beaten some really good men here. But then he went over to, he finally got a world title shot, which was the WBO cruiser title. Against Ralph Rocchigiani. Rocchigiani, one of 2 fighting brothers. He came over to Britain, fought for it was vacant. I think the WBO title was vacant. The WBO was just becoming established. It wasn't really established. It wasn't considered, certainly in America, it wasn't considered to be like one of the main belts. But it was becoming quite respected on this side of the pond. Not so much in America. In Europe, in Britain, it was taken off. Frank Warren had a very, very close relationship with the WBO. He used to promote a lot of his fighters through that route. And Carl was no different. They brought Ralph Rocchigiani over for the vacant WBO cruiser title. And in fact, Carl was stopped in 11 rounds, and I think he dislocated his shoulder or his arm. There was an arm injury or a shoulder injury, and he was winning that fight. So Carl then, like he always does, dusted himself down, scored 3 wins against lesser fighters, went over to Germany for a rematch with Rocchigiani and was expected to lose. Rocchigiani on points was probably going to be the result. In actual fact, Carl won a split decision in Germany against Rocchigiani, and that is, again, as with Italy back in those days, very, very difficult to win a fight on the road in Germany if you're a British fighter. He won a split decision and won most of the rounds. So he became the WBO cruiserweight champion against all odds. He was British champ, he was EBU champ, and now he was WBO champ. Tremendous career. Well, he cashed in on the WBO title with back-to-back victories over Chris Eubank, who had lost his WBO super middleweight title to Steve Collins twice. He fought Collins and lost both on points. He then fought an up-and-coming Joe Calzaghe, lost on points, got floored in the first round. Really, that was a coming-of-age fight for Calzaghe. So Chris said, I'll jump up 2 divisions, all the way up to cruiserweight, and I'll fight Carl for the WBO title. Chris Eubank had a very, very good relationship with the WBO, having held their middleweight and super middleweight titles. And he gave the much bigger man, I mean, Carl was much, much bigger than Chris. He gave him all he could handle. And even at one point, looked like he was going to knock him out. But Carl got the wins, very, very hard-earned wins. Unanimous decision in the first fight, and in the second fight, Chris retired after 9 rounds with a badly swollen eye. I mean, it was shut tight. And I think that was Chris's last fight, actually. Well, so Carl is flying. He's made those 2 defences of the belt. He then goes in with Johnny Nelson, who was a big rival. Johnny would be mouthing off, saying he wanted to fight Carl. And Johnny controversially stopped Carl in the 5th round of a 12-rounder. Carl was in trouble, no doubt about it. But it did look like a slightly premature stoppage. And Carl was absolutely fuming because Carl was used to being in trouble. He was used to having fights where he'd be on the back foot, he'd be losing, and then he'd come back and he'd win. You know what I mean? And he was begging for a return match, begging for it. And to be honest with you, the fact that Johnny Nelson didn't give him a return match is to his detriment, because I think that was disappointing from Johnny. I quite like Johnny Nelson. I don't think he's that bad a fighter, but Carl gave him a chance. He should have given Carl a chance for revenge and didn't. So Carl did what he normally does. Having lost his WBO title, couldn't get a return. He fought for the vacant British cruiserweight title against Terry Dunstan, knocked him out in the last round. Again, tough fight. Went over, actually they brought him over. Alain Simon was brought over to Britain. I don't know, it's Barnsley or Manchester or Birmingham or something like that. And Carl picked up the EBU title again, TKO in 6 rounds. So suddenly he's British and European champ again. He fought Alexei Ilyin, stopped him in 2 rounds. That was a defence of the EBU title. And then he won the lightly regarded IBO title against Uriah Grant, his second world title. The IBO isn't considered a major title now, and it certainly wasn't back then. But, it's a belt. Stopped Uriah Grant in 5 rounds. And again, Uriah Grant was a tough guy, a tough, decent fighter. But then, and we're up to 2001 now, Carl had an absolute barn burner, which you've got to see. It was with Ezra Sellers, the American, who was brought over to Manchester for Carl to beat up. What a fight. I mean, this is really where the fun starts for Carl. He has this sort of second career almost, where he's in these absolute knockdown, drag him out rucks. And this was one of them, because Carl was on the floor 4 times and Sellers was on the floor twice. And it was one of those, 1 minute one guy's down, the next minute the other guy's down. And you just don't know who's going to win the fight until it's over. Brilliant fight. But Carl got stopped in 4 rounds, which was considered to be a bit of a shocker. So he came back again. He still had but by the way, that was for the IBO title. So he lost that title. But he still had the British and European. I don't think he was stripped, or he may have been. I can't remember offhand. But he carried on fighting the, journeyman at British level. Then in Sheffield, he had another of these incredible wars with a guy called Sebastian Rothman from South Africa. They brought him over to Sheffield. This was an IBO cruiser title fight. And Thompson was knocked down in the 4th round. He had Rothman down in the 5th, but for the most part, certainly in the second half of the fight, Rothman was battering the hell out of Carl. And suddenly, out of nowhere, in the 9th round, Carl knocks him out, knocks him flat. It's an amazing ending, because Carl looked like he was on the verge of being stopped repeatedly, and then suddenly, bang, he catches Rothman, over goes Rothman, and Carl scores a 9th round TKO. Now, that was in 2004. Later on that same year, who they put him in with? An up-and-coming David Haye. And David Haye, 10-0 at the time, being, groomed as a world champ, future world champ. This was, the IBO title was on the line, but like I say, it didn't have any worth then. It doesn't really have much worth now. And again, Hay in the first 2 rounds, 3 rounds, beat the living crap out of Carl Thompson. It was amazing to watch. It's an amazing fight. But Hay shot his bolt. Hay had done the same thing against Arthur Weathers, who's a common opponent. He jumped on him early and just smashed him to bits. Weathers. He tried to do the same with Thompson, but Thompson wobbling all over the place, looking like he was about to hit the floor. Not a bit of it. He hung in there desperately, and Hay shot his bolt. Was exhausted by the 5th round, got floored, and Carl Thompson scored a massive upset with David Hay, massive, to hand him his first defeat. Well, strangely enough, despite that, Carl only had one more fight, and that was against Frederick Saad. That was in Sheffield as well. It was a 10-round points win. And again, Saad wasn't too bad a fighter. He had a decent record. You know, he came in with like 23 wins and 4 defeats. You know, these were good, again, good European level fighters. And he fought for an EBU title as well, Saad. But strangely enough, after that, and I think it's probably because Carl just couldn't get the opportunities, and he was getting on a little bit in age, he retired. So the Ezra Sellers fight was his final defeat. That was in 2001. He retired in 2005. And he was on a winning run of six wins. And you know, I think 4 of them, were knockouts. But he decided to retire in 2005. It had been a long career, 17 years. He was getting up in age. But Carl Thompson, definitely one of the most exciting British fighters of the last 30 or 40 years. 2-time British champ, 2-time EBU champ, WBO champ, made a couple of defences. And a wildly exciting fighter to watch, wildly exciting. Finished with 34 wins, 25 KOs, 6 defeats, 5 of which were stoppages. So he had that kill or be killed attitude, that thing going on. But again, another example of a fighter who learns from his defeats, learns from his mistakes, actually gets back on the horse when he's knocked over. You know, his first world title shot, he had that dislocated shoulder or arm, whatever it was, came back. You know, this is what you want from your fighters. Defeats don't necessarily define your career unless you let them. And Carl Thompson, an absolute living sign of that. So yeah, that's a little overview, a little thumbnail sketch of Carl Thompson. If you don't know him, go on YouTube and watch some of his fights. You will not be disappointed. Watch the Ezra Sellers one to start with. That'll get you going. Brilliant fight. But yeah. Okay, well, thanks for your time as always. Comments below, I'll answer them. If you could subscribe to the channel, that'd be great. You know, hit the like button as well. That's a real plus for us. Build the channel up. And yeah, I hope you liked the video. Speak again soon, and bye for now.